If you've been relying solely on energy work for healing for months, maybe even years, and you're still not healing, your marriage is still toxic, your relationships aren't changing, and you're sitting there frustrated thinking, what the hell? Why isn't any of this working? It might be because energy work was never supposed to be doing the job all by itself. It might actually be doing more harm than good if we're using it as a substitute for the deeper work. If that statement made you feel some kind of way, I invite you to sit with that feeling and continue to listen, because I might be about to give you the missing puzzle piece that you've been looking for. Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Uncaged Feminine podcast, where we heal trauma, rip off the masks, stomp on the rules, and call out the BS keeping us small. I'm Heidi, your guide for digging deep, reclaiming your divine feminine power, and laughing in the face of all the crap that's been holding you back. It's my honor to walk alongside you as you turn it all into freedom, sovereignty, and a life that actually feels like yours. I don't want you to think that I'm against spiritual practices, quite the opposite. I'm a very spiritual person. I receive Reiki as needed, do cord cuttings, clear chakras, I smudge my space to remove negative energy, and I faithfully wear a bracelet made from obsidian because every time I forget to wear it, it seems my husband calls just to catch up. I'm also a trauma-informed certified spiritual coach, and because of this, I believe spirituality can be incredibly powerful and is important to our well-being. I also believe there's a big difference between using spirituality as a tool for healing and using spirituality to explain away the shit that's happening right in front of your face. I'm not trying to take spirituality out of healing. I just want to make sure we're not using it to avoid healing. So why am I talking about this today? Well, recently I received a newsletter email that I subscribe to, and the topic was relationships that are actually karmic soul contracts. It talked about how women think their dysfunctional marriages or partnerships or situationships, whatever the case may be, are simply the result of communication issues, misaligned attachment styles, and partners who are unhealed, and that everything could be fixed if they could just get their person to finally see things from their angle. Okay, there's truth in that. I mean, to truly repair something, everyone does kind of need to be on the same page, right? Then it gives signs a woman is living inside a karmic soul contract. Perfect. It talked about how intensely magnetic the relationship was in the beginning. Then the switch to the connection swinging between big highs and devastating lows. It talked about how the woman may want to leave, maybe she even did, only to find herself pulled back in, frustrated, and asking herself why she just can't stay away. It discusses patterns in the relationship so specific and repetitive that it feels like a loop they can't find the exit to. And as I was reading this, I'm nodding. I'm thinking, yep, full agreement here, because these were many of the things I experienced in the last few years of my marriage. Then it literally said that therapy and communication strategies won't work. It didn't say they might not work, it said they won't. That what is needed instead is a good cord cutting and Reiki. Wait, what? Now, as I'm reading, my radar's going off. A whole lot of red flags are showing up, and I'm thinking, ma'am, something is missing. The email takes a relationship containing things like betrayal, repeated lies, big highs, big lows, the inability to leave, repetitive, harmful patterns, and the complete and total destruction of peace, joy, and self-worth. And it gives the reader a primarily spiritual interpretation. It says it's a karmic contract, a soul connection, an energetic cord that you can just cut, a psychic attack, a lesson, or you two have shared lifetimes together that need to be healed. And that's a huge interpretive leap. Because if you tell someone their painful relationship exists because their soul needs to learn something, you can accidentally turn suffering into a spiritual assignment they feel obligated to complete. And suddenly, leaving can feel like a failure. Now, that woman isn't just trying to decide whether this relationship is healthy. She's trying to figure out whether she's abandoning a spiritual assignment. And this is where the ego can get really, really sneaky, because sometimes ego doesn't show up saying, I'm better than everyone else. Sometimes it shows up saying, I am uniquely qualified to save this person. Ego might say, I understand their wounds. I see their potential. I know why they behave the way they behave. And you may very well be able to see their wounds. You might even understand why they are the way they are. But ladies, their healing is not your assignment. It is not your job. It is their job. Their healing is their own assignment. And I'm not arguing whether karmic relationships exist. I absolutely believe we can learn something from people we engage with. I have an issue with what happens when that framework becomes the dominant explanation for harmful behavior. The email spoke about karmic contracts, soul connections, energetic cords, lifetimes, lessons, psychic interference, and sometimes believing someone was sent to us for a reason, or that this relationship is fated, becomes a way of making the pain make sense. Because if this person was sent to you for some great spiritual purpose, then maybe, just maybe, all of this suffering has a reason. Maybe you just have to figure out what that lesson is and then learn from it, and the relationship can be healthy. Maybe you just have to heal a little more yourself. Maybe you just have to hang on just a little bit longer. And that can get dangerous really fucking fast. Labeling that pain as a spiritual lesson or destiny makes the suffering feel purposeful. It's often much easier for the human brain to accept the idea that a relationship is some cosmic test than it is to admit they're trapped in a psychologically addictive, harmful cycle with someone who cannot or will not treat them well. And I'm not just picking on spirituality, or New Age as some would call it. Almost every religion has some form of female self-sacrificing in its doctrine. And there was a whole lot missing from that email too. Codependency, trauma bonds, trauma responses, attachment patterns, boundaries, relational accountability, childhood conditioning, emotional abuse and manipulation. It doesn't explain some of the really important stuff. It doesn't explain why intensity feels like love, or why the highs can feel so damn high that we're willing to tolerate the lows. It doesn't explain why we keep explaining away behavior that if we saw the same thing happening to a friend, we'd immediately recognize it as unhealthy. It also doesn't explain why we become so obsessed with fixing another person. It ignores the fact that when a dynamic is stuck in a toxic loop, both people can be reacting from subconscious programming rather than the present moment. That doesn't mean both people are equally responsible for what's happening. What it does mean is we're looking at two human beings bringing their own histories, wounds, triggers, patterns into that relationship. The same fight happens over and over because the underlying core injuries like abuse, rejection, abandonment, neglect are never really addressed. That email was a classic example of spiritual bypassing. And we don't do bypassing around here. Claiming that Reiki and cord cutting is all that is needed to heal a toxic relationship completely ignores the very real psychological, behavioral, and physiological shit that can keep someone stuck. It's okay to believe a relationship has a karmic component, but that doesn't mean we stop looking at the crap happening right in front of our faces. Spiritual meaning should never require us to ignore observable behavior. So what is spiritual bypassing when it comes to dysfunctional relationships? It's when spiritual ideas or energetic practices are used to avoid, dismiss, or skip over painful psychological realities and emotional wounds. It's a painless quick fix, if you will. But the flaw in that quick fix approach is that it ignores the nervous system. A trauma bond alters your brain chemistry, keeping your body physically addicted to stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, dopamine. We cannot wave that away with energy work alone. Spiritual bypassing sidesteps codependency, and codependency doesn't disappear because we cleared an energetic cord. These are patterns we learned somewhere, maybe in childhood, maybe through past relationships, maybe through years of learning to keep the peace, manage someone else's emotions, or maybe to make ourselves smaller so that everything else doesn't blow up. It can frame the solution as something external, a karmic cord, an energetic attachment, the other person's unhealed wounds that we just need to fix. And that can distract us from the part of the healing that actually belongs to us. There's a danger in relying on energy work alone to fix deep-seated issues. By spiritually bypassing instead of making the necessary behavioral changes, like setting boundaries, shadow work, that are required for true healing, these spiritual shortcuts can actually prolong the toxic relationship dynamics instead of resolving them. A spiritual practice can provide genuine emotional relief, but relief is not the same thing as resolution. Someone can feel calmer after a ritual, or emotionally lighter. They can absolutely experience the practice of meaningful. But if they then return to the same relationship, maintain the same boundaries, interpret the same behavior through the same lens, and never examine why they're repeatedly pulled towards the dynamic, the relationship hasn't changed. The ritual may have changed how they feel temporarily. It hasn't necessarily changed the relationship itself. And this is where it gets sneaky, because you do feel better. You feel lighter, calmer. You feel like you finally released something, and that's real. Those feelings are valid. But feeling better isn't necessarily the same thing as the situation getting better. The immediate but temporary relief creates a false sense of progress. It avoids the pain of changing behaviors. It feels safe because it doesn't require confronting a partner or even yourself for that matter. And let me tell you from experience, it is hard calling yourself out on your own crap. And by choosing the energetic route alone, a woman can avoid the difficult, real-world actions required to actually leave. You cannot clear a cord energetically that your actions aren't lining up with. If you cut the cord on Tuesday, then answer the "Hey honey" text on Wednesday, make an excuse for his behavior on Thursday, and then keep quiet about your own needs on Friday just so he doesn't get upset, and then you spend the weekend wondering, why is the cord still there? Honey, you were over there crocheting the friggin' cord back together all by yourself. And another thing the email said, the relationship isn't the root, the wound it's activating is. That sounds profound, and it's true. But ladies, sometimes the relationship itself is the problem. And that's an important distinction. Not every painful relationship is merely a mirror for your unhealed wounds. Sometimes someone is just behaving badly. They're repeatedly violating your boundaries. They continue to be dishonest. They continue to manipulate and abuse. The healthiest interpretation isn't always asking yourself, what wound is this activating in me? Sometimes the better questions are, what wound am I carrying that causes me to continue to accept behavior that violates what I need in a relationship? Or, what happened in my history that taught me this behavior was something I need to tolerate, or I need to manage, or I need to fix, or I need to explain, earn my way out of, or love my way out of, or suffer through? These questions can coexist, and they're all valid. And here's where my concern gets even bigger. If an energetic practitioner is working with someone who may be experiencing serious relational harm, telling them this is a karmic contract isn't just cute. It can actually influence how they understand what's happening and convince them to just tough it out while the healing continues. And if that practitioner then sells the solution as identifying karmic contracts, clearing your energetic cords, or releasing psychic intrusions, you've moved from meaning making into a potentially consequential explanation for someone's distress. And if they're not recommending you also work to heal the mind, the body, the patterns, heal the boundaries, do the shadow work, and maybe even potentially get therapy if that's appropriate, then I'm going to question that. Because if the answer to a deeply dysfunctional relationship is basically, let's cut the cord and clear the energy, I'm sorry, but we've left a few chapters out of that book. Now, I'm not suggesting you leave your current relationship or that you leave and never look at yourself. Nope. Two things can be true. One, their behavior is their responsibility. Two, your pattern of participating in that relationship is yours to explore. You're going to need to explore things like, why do I tolerate this? What did I learn about love growing up? Why do I feel responsible for fixing other people? What happens inside of me when someone pulls away or I begin to feel abandoned? Why does chaos feel so familiar and peace feels so foreign? Why do I confuse being needed with being loved? And what boundaries am I afraid to enforce? In other words, you're not taking responsibility for what someone else did to you. You're taking responsibility for what you do next. But here's a caveat. Healing yourself doesn't always mean healing the relationship. And sometimes healing yourself means realizing you don't need to keep participating in the relationship to prove that you've actually healed. And I believe that's why so many women are afraid to do the deeper work. Because healing might mean their world that as they know it changes forever. They might realize they just can't stay where they are anymore, and starting over is scary. Add with that many of us are convinced that all men are the same, which isn't true by a long shot. But believing they are could cause us to ask why bother to start over with the same situation. Or maybe we just stick with the devil we know. And please don't think I'm poo-pooing spiritual practices, because I'm not. Spiritual practices are just one of the sets of tools in the healing toolbox. So where do practices like Reiki and cord cutting and spiritual rituals fall into the healing system? Well, I believe these practices are incredibly meaningful. I use them myself. So this isn't an attack on Reiki or cord cutting. A spiritual practice can absolutely help someone to regulate their emotions, to feel calmer, to create emotional distance with the person doing harm, reconnect with themselves, and to feel supported. All of these are valuable. But spirituality cannot replace the reality staring you in the face. If the relationship is dysfunctional, you still have to examine behavior, patterns, boundaries, trauma, accountability, all the things. And we have to be careful that spirituality doesn't become part of the avoidance. And that's the really interesting part, because spiritual bypassing isn't always, I don't want to deal with my feelings, so I'll go meditate. Sometimes it's much sneakier. This relationship is karmic. We're connected on a soul level. He's triggering my wounds because we're meant to heal together. I need to clear the cord, raise my vibration, heal myself more. We're twin flames. This is a part of my spiritual journey. And meanwhile, the other person is still lying, they're still hiding things, they're still manipulating, they're violating your boundaries. Sometimes spirituality becomes the velvet curtain we hang over something we already know is broken. A spiritual practice can absolutely support the healing, but it can't do the healing for you. A cord cutting ritual is not the same thing as setting a boundary. If this episode made you question something in your own life, I invite you to sit with just one question this week. Where might I be using a spiritual exclamation to avoid confronting something I already know? Don't judge yourself for the answer, just get curious. Because sometimes the lesson isn't how to stay, sometimes the lesson is that you don't have to keep participating in the lesson. If this episode resonated with you and you would like to connect on a further level, all of my contact information is in the description box below. And if you have someone in your life who you think needs to hear this, please share it. Thanks for being here with me today. I love you, and we'll see you on the next episode.